Giran Ozcan joins us now for more on Turkey's runoff election. He's the Executive Director of the Kurdish Peace Institute here in Washington, D.C. Giran, great to have you on the program. Now, Sunday's election has assured that the Erdogan era lives on. What does this mean for the country, especially given its leader has already been in power for 2 decades now?
Well, I think we can definitely draw the conclusion that the electorate in Turkey, 52% of them, have said that they want more of the same. And I think when we talk about Erdogan's 2 decades in power, we can really separate the first decade and second decade. I think over time, Erdogan has changed policies, he's changed his language, he's changed a lot of things, he's changed his partners in power. So rather than a continuous 20-year government that will continue, I think we can talk about the second decade of Erdogan, and that Erdogan will continue his power and continue his policies. So I think over the last 7 or 8 years, the shift in the Turkish government's policies and outlook, both domestically and internationally, will continue, and the electorate of Turkey have said that they want more of the same.
Turkey's pro-Kurdish parties on Thursday reaffirmed their support for opposition Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu a day after expressing anger at his deal with a far-right party. Talk about the Kurdish vote and how polarising it can be for candidates during the election cycle and what it means for them, given that Erdogan is now in power again.
Well, as I just said, the second decade of Erdogan's reign hasn't really been very good for the Kurds, and that is why they put their full force, especially the HDP, put its full force behind the opposition candidate, because over the last 7 or 8 years, especially with Erdogan's alliance with the MHP, which is a ultra-right-wing nationalist party, the Kurds have not fared very well in Turkey, and that's why they supported the opposition candidate to seek some change in the Turkish government. And obviously that, as a policy, with the results that have just come in, has objectively failed. And so I do fear that there could be some repercussions for the Kurds, because Erdogan saw in this election cycle that the Kurds aren't supporting him en masse. They actually supported the opposition candidate in all Kurdish majority cities in Turkey. Kılıçdaroğlu was by far and away the #1 candidate that they opted for. So we could see a further intensification of the nationalistic discourse that Erdogan has utilized over the last 7 or 8 years, and that doesn't really bode well for Kurdish prospects inside and outside of Turkey.
And essentially not 48% of the country either. I mean, Erdogan's win was expected, but it wasn't by any means a landslide. And given that, there is such a sharp, 52-48%, it does suggest there is a divide in the country. Does this divide run purely along ideological lines, or is there more to it than that?
I would say that there is more to it than that, because the fault lines are ideological, they are identity-based, and essentially, I think in the current electoral system that Erdogan himself brought about, a polarization of 2 camps serves the incumbent, and we've seen that in both the 2018 presidential elections, but also in this election, where a candidate needs 50%, at least 50% of the vote. So a polarization on ethnic and ideological lines serves especially an incumbent during the election cycle, but the consolidation of bases revolves in Turkey right now around these ideological and ethnic fault lines. And that's why on the one side now you have a very Turkish Sunni camp that exacerbates and promotes a Turkish Sunni identity. And one of the downfalls of the opposition candidate was that he was neither ethnically Turkish or religiously Sunni. He's ethnic Kurd, and he is a member of a minority religion. He's an Alevi, and this was weaponized against him during the election campaign. And I do see, unfortunately, going forward, these fault lines exacerbated and deepened. And even in his victory speech, Erdogan was adamant on pushing home these fault lines and really exaggerating these fault lines, even again using LGBT as a derogatory term of insult.
A powerful tool, fear-mongering. Now, in terms of the international stage, how will foreign policy look now with a more emboldened Erdogan? Will Turkey approve Sweden's NATO membership, and how might the relationship with Russia change?
Over the last 7 or 8 years, Turkey has tried to position itself as a more neutral, non-aligned power in the global power competition that we've seen intensify over the last decade or so. And I think that will continue. Now, an Erdogan unencumbered by an election in the near future, a general election in the near future, will push on with the policies that have, in all honesty, served him pretty well over the last 7 or 8 years. Now, as a member of NATO, operating as a non-aligned or neutral power raises a lot of question marks in the Western camp led by NATO. As a member of this organization for the best part of 7 decades, Turkey has obligations to Western powers like the US that it simply hasn't upheld in the last 7 or 8 years. So I think we can see, or safely say, that over the next months and years, we'll see tensions between the West and Turkey deepen, not soften, because especially now with Ukraine and tensions between the West and countries like Russia and China, as they intensify, and I think there is a general consensus that they will, Turkey is going to try and play these powers off of one another to extract as many concessions as possible. So when it comes to issues like Sweden, it will all come down to what sort of concessions and what sort of deals Turkey can extract, especially from the West. So purely on a transactional basis, I think the tensions revolving around Sweden will be utilized and weaponized by the Turkish government going forward. I don't see a solution on that front in the very near future.
Okay, all right. Giran Ozcan, really appreciate your time. Executive Director of the Kurdish Peace Institute here in Washington.